Okay, Blake, tell everyone your salary.
Toby, it's literally in the employee handbook not to discuss pay.
Welcome to the Church Gear Podcast, where we pull the tech out of the booth and onto the stage to share the most outlandish stories and hidden wisdom from the tech trenches. And now, here are your hosts.
I'm your host, Blake Hodges, a man who has read talking about salary amongst your coworkers is the quickest way to get a raise. And I'm here with my co-host who just broke out into hives hearing this, Toby Walters.
Yeah, my personal opinion is that talking about your salary with coworkers is a really bad idea.
You know how there's the Church Gear All group chat?
Yes.
There's one all minus the exec level and above, and we've all posted our pay in a Google Doc. Actually, how am I supposed to tell you that? So everybody already knows, but there we go. Let's talk about some money here today.
All right, and that's a fireable offense, so only the exec team still works here now.
It's actually illegal to make that like a real thing. But then again, Tennessee's right to hire, right to fire. So I'm like, what is illegal?
That's why we live in Tennessee.
It's a funny state.
So, Blake, we've all, anybody who's had a job has hopefully earned money on that job.
I'm still hoping for that here.
I know. One of these days, I think at your 2-year anniversary, we're going to start paying you.
2-year anniversary, bro.
Oh,
I'm
wait.
hitting 3 in
Dang it.
September.
Man, you've been here a long time. It just feels like 18 years.
First full-time employee at Church Gear.
So I'm gonna run down a little of my church history here. My very first paying church job, because I had an unpaying church job at my first church growing up, just like volunteer worship and youth, and a lot of us grew up volunteering in different ministries, and that's wonderful. And I still volunteer in ministries at church. I have,
Even though they keep telling them not to.
they try to get rid of me. But my first job was a part-time youth and worship pastor job at a small church in San Diego. It's like 20 hours a week. And I know we're going back a ways, but this was about 20 years ago, 2003. What do you think my weekly pay was?
Well, minimum wage back then was $5.25 times 20. That's what? That's 200. That's 100.
Math is hard for you.
That's 100.
So I made $165 a week.
I was
at this
two-thirds the way
part-time
there.
job. And after it was at least a year, if not 2 years, they finally offered me a raise of $175 a week. So I get a $10 a week raise. And in my mind at that point, I was thinking like, just don't even give me a raise rather than insult me with $10 a week.
I was going to say, like, more money is more money, but actually, if it's like less than 1%, like, you're actually insulting people.
Yeah, a little bit. So then I went and joined a church plant. And for all of our people out there that have been involved in a church plant, you know there's not a whole lot of money up front.
Until the embezzlement begins.
You're really doing this because you feel called to do it. And
Called to embezzle.
a lot of people will raise funds for 1 to 2 years to obviously help the financial portion of the launch. But I didn't do that. I didn't raise funds. I didn't even feel comfortable raising funds. Like that's a really hard thing to call up people and say, hey, I'm going to work a job, but it doesn't pay me. Would you like to pay me instead? So a few months in, we finally started getting a very tiny budget. And so my pastor graciously offered me $300 per month as the worship pastor at the church plant. And at one point, and we had a fun rapport so we could banter like you and I do a bit, Blake. And
How dare you? No one can banter with you like me.
At one point I told him, I said, I really appreciate, the small stipend you're able to give me. By the way, I actually tithe more than I make at this church.
That is such a flex. I like it.
So then moving to Texas in 2006, I was kind of a contract worship leader at different churches. I travel and I do just like rehearsals and weekend service. And it was anywhere from $200 to $500, just depending on the church, how much it involved, like how many services. And obviously $500 a week just to lead worship and do rehearsal in my mind was huge because I had been making $165 a week, doing it 20 hours a week.
The worship inflation is not talked about enough.
No. And then I moved into my band and I moved into a role at a church out there, and we negotiated essentially a monthly salary, but we were contractors as the band, and we got paid $6,000 per month as the band. So 4 people had to divide that up. And also we had to pay our band expenses. Like we still had, equipment and different stuff that we were purchasing, but that was our contract rate with the church.
That's
and
still a lot more than the 500. The worship inflation across the nation is going crazy.
so if you divide 6,000 by 4, you get $1,500, and then divide that by 4, you actually get less than $500 a week per person.
Look at that. The Fed actually decreased inflation on worship.
And then when that ended, I started doing a search, and I actually did a candidate search with Slingshot looking for worship pastor position at churches all over the country. And I remember some of the salaries that were being offered. Honestly, I wished I remembered more of them, but I don't remember all of them. But there was one in Kansas City, and it was right around 60 to 65 grand a year. There was one in San Clemente, California, which is it's in Orange County. It's one of the most beautiful spots on the planet and very expensive to live. Church was maybe 1,000 people, and they were offering $70,000 a year for the worship pastor. And then there was one church in Fresno. Blake, do you know where Fresno is?
I know you hate Fresno.
It's in the middle of California, and people refer to it as the armpit of California. Like, it's still in California, so it's not cheap to live, but it's also not very nice. It's in Central Valley, and it gets really hot.
If it's the middle, it should be more like the jelly roll rather than the armpit.
It's the jelly roll of California. And they were offering me what they said, and we never actually got to the job offer. They were offering me a package worth $90,000 a year. And what that meant exactly, I wasn't sure. If
Toby's
that included
package is worth $90,000 a year.
If that included benefits, if it had a ministerial housing allowance, I didn't quite know. But I know at that point in my life, I thought $90,000 a year, like that's more than I've ever heard of. But that did not work out. None of this worked out, and which landed me in Nashville, Blake, which is, why you and I met.
It's your destiny.
And there was so what landed me in Nashville was a job with a Christian university that hired me as a full-time, artist in residence. You can even call me a worship leader because I was going to go lead worship all over the place. And they offered me $60,000 a year, full-time. And they offered a stipend for my band, which I told them that's not enough for my band. So I actually gave back $8,000 as salary. I took $52,000 so that I could give that $8,000 to get the band to a point where I felt like, okay, I could actually pay the band enough for them to work, 15 hours a week. But that's my salary history until I learned, or until I left that job and then just, buying and selling gear full time, which led to church gear. But all the while in this, Blake, like, as you see, I made $165 a week, $500 a month, $300 a month, whatever it was. I always had side hustles that would help pay the bills. And usually that was buying and selling gear, which is why church gear even exists today, because that's what helped pay the bills. I had to, I had a ministry job and they paid varying amounts, but I had to make it work to provide for a wife and a family.
Well, speaking of someone that knows all about a side hustle, the former production director at Christ Community and now director of marketing at Amplio and associate at Slingshot. Look at all them side hustles. Caleb Loeppky, welcome to the show, bro.
What's up, guys? Glad to be back.
How many sides is that hustle? How many sides do you have, Caleb?
I don't really know. Now that I'm here at Amplio, my Slingshot's probably my, kind of main other love. And even when I came on staff, it was like, hey, I love being able to serve other churches and church production people that are looking for jobs. I feel like God has put me on this planet to help do some of that. If I can do both, then I would love to, join the Amplio staff. And it was like, all right, let's do it. So I get to do that and spend lots and lots of time with lots of church production people.
When Caleb gets extra side, it's extra sides, it's side hustles. When I get extra sides, it's just, can I get an extra side with that? Can I get some extra green beans?
Yeah,
some extra
I
fries?
thought you were going to say
Extra
gravy.
fries.
Heck yeah. If it's white gravy, gray or brown gravy, you can't do it.
Yeah.
Okay, Caleb. Speaking of something you can do, though, we've got our 5 truths and a lie modified to 2 truths and a lie, and it's flipped on you. Also, Toby, are we counting this if the guests get the points? Because we don't even have a chance to score here. I don't think we count that overall.
Well, first of all, I'm looking. You still call this segment 5 truths and a lie, even though it's only 3 now. So straight up, you're lying to start with.
Well, yeah, got to keep on theme. All right, Caleb. This is from our 378 respondents on our church tech survey, which actually you kind of gave me this idea to do. And then Toby also had independently told me we should do a survey. So
it was my idea.
Well, y'all both said it to me.
Who said it first?
Caleb.
Come on, tell us now.
Who said it better? Who could fire you if you didn't do it?
Well, I'm immortal at this point. Okay,
Yeah.
here we go. Number 1, the majority of team sizes reported on this survey was 0 to 3 people.
Did people report 0 people on a team?
Me and Brian have talked at length about how the answer 0 should have been redone. Number 2, 65% of our respondents said they'd switch jobs for a 10% raise.
Okay.
Number 3, the majority of respondents commented in the write-in portion on inflation/raises. So I'll give it to you one more time. You got the majority of team sizes reported 0 to 3. 65% of our respondents said they'd switch jobs for a 10% raise. And the majority of respondents on the write-in portion wrote about inflation and getting a raise. Where's the lie?
I think majority of teams 0 to 3 is correct. I think. Oh man, because they're both about raises. The last 2 questions are about raises. So I think it could be. I think that they would leave for a 10% raise.
So
and then the lie is in the comments about inflation and raises, although that feels very, very similar to the other one. So I don't know. It could be 50-50 to be honest.
Toby, you don't actually know the answer to this. So
No,
do you
I
want to
haven't.
guess?
Gosh, that's a good one. I'm going to guess that that the middle one is not true, that 65% did not say they'd leave for a 10% raise.
Toby is correct. I had that question in the survey and then it got nixed. So
What was actually true, Blake, is that they'd leave for a $10 a week pay raise.
oh
Like, I
gosh.
got-
I was going to say like 10% is like that feels low for people to want to leave, but I also kind of know the state of like people right now in that world. And I go, I've seen worse.
Caleb, if you were offered a $10 raise, how would you react?
I would say you're still going to buy me lunch today. So let's go out to lunch.
I'd pull out a 20 and be like, here's 2 weeks in advance.
Oh, goodness. Okay. Well, let's head into the questions because, Caleb, we've got a lot of them for you. Give us a quick rundown of your church production background and where you're currently at in relation to like how you're working at Slingshot.
Yeah. So I went to college outside of St. Louis at a fun little Christian university outside there. Met my wife, whole other fun story that I think we talked about in the last podcast in a 2 Truths and a Lie segment. And I went from that role in college, or what I was doing in college, directly to a church. And this is important to talk about because of where I'm at now. So at the time, this is 2012-ish, I think it was, 2012, maybe 2013. I was getting ready to like graduate, looking for a job. Church staffing existed, nowhere else existed basically. And the church staffing was like a bust. Like I would apply basically every time a new role would pop up and I just like, nobody would call me back. And I found this website that was literally a list of mega churches in alphabetical order. And the mega church, I think, was like anything over like 1,200 or something like that. In alphabetical order in the US based on like state and stuff like that. So I start in the A's and I make it all the way to the M's before I get a call. And the M's was the first call that I got and the first job that I accepted full-time out of college. So that was, one of the weirdest things ever to like have this like website that was just like basically just a giant like dictionary of churches, their sizes, their senior pastor, and what their like average attendance was supposedly. And then from there, went to my first like full-time production role and was there at that church for a couple of years outside of St. Louis. And then maybe 2 years later, we got pregnant with our first kid and we're like, hey, let's move up to Chicagoland, try to be closer to family. My wife and I moved and I joined staff at a church called The Chapel, which is a big multi-site church, Northwest burbs up here in Chicagoland. And I was there for right about 6 years. And from there, I went to Christ Community Church, which was the last church that I was on staff at. and I was there for a couple of years, and I transitioned off in July 31st of last year, July 30th of last year. So I'm coming up on a year like this week of being out of full-time ministry in that context. And through like my time at the chapel, like I had like an incredible privilege of like working with a guy named Todd Elliott who runs Philo Conference. He is the man. I feel so like lucky that like he happened to be a consultant at the chapel when I joined the staff. And so like I got to spend, basically 4 or 5 years, like just kind of helping be mentored by him, like in my seat. And it was just like an incredible way to like get connected with a ton of people that Todd knew. And so I joined the Philo core team. Philo Conference stands for First and Last Out. If you guys don't know, it's amazing. Everybody should attend who listens to this. And I think it was 2019. And this was, pre-COVID. So we were meeting in Lakeside Auditorium at Willow in Chicago. And I remember sitting in the back of the room and thinking, if I got on stage and asked who's looking for a job, nobody's going to raise their hand because the person right here is the volunteer that they brought to the conference, and the person right here is their boss. And so they're like, I can't really, do that. But I knew, like, I just imagining in my head, all these people's hands would go up, if I asked that question. And so I kind of mulled on that for a little bit. And then the next day at Philo, I actually ran into Stan Endicott, who is one of the original founders of Slingshot Group. I knew him through Slingshot. I knew him through some other like mutual connections and like a weird thing that I was at the National Worship Leaders Conference back in like 2008, singing in a choir with Tommy Walker that he was directing. That's a whole other story. It's amazing. And I walked up to Stan. I was like, hey, I know you. You don't really know me. I have this like heart for doing this. There's a couple thousand church production people here today. And I had been mulling this around with Todd and doing some sort of like staffing, recruiting, something with, possibly with Philo. Like it felt like a really great avenue to do that. And so, started talking with Todd about it. When I circled up with Stan, I was like, hey, Todd and I have been talking about doing something like this. Can we just pick your brain, like over lunch or breakfast or something like that, to talk about how Slingshot's doing it? And, about a couple months went by through the summer, and we ended up kind of launching our own thing that was called Philo Staffing, like kind of powered by Slingshot Group. So we were using a lot of the tools that Slingshot was, and so I kind of joined the Slingshot staff now 4 years ago in August, which is crazy. And I've been doing that, anything from like searching and finding people for roles in churches, and doing a bunch of coaching and stuff like that with church production leaders. And it's been really, really cool to see it grow. And it's been really, really crazy to see what has changed from 2019 to today because of COVID, because of everything. It's such a different landscape than what it used to be. So it's crazy. So that's like a quick rundown of kind of what I'm doing and where I'm at today.
So I love that you found the megachurch list and just started. It's like you went to the phone book and just started at A and went down the list. And for anyone listening, like if you're looking for a job, that's a great way to do it, even though you don't have to do that anymore. Like if you start with A, you'll get a call back on your first church right now.
That's why I thought it was hilarious. He got to M.
And so I won't say his name, but a friend of mine, full-time production director at a church, reached out to me yesterday and said, hey, I just want to put this bug in your ear. My wife and I are just thinking about, relocating and doing a new role. He said, nothing bad about my church. There's, no major reason. We just feel God's pull doing something new. And he said, do you know of anybody looking? And I said, dude, tell me what city you want to go to, and I'll connect you with 5 churches that are trying to hire good production people. Like, it's not about being able to find a job right now. I think the most important thing we're talking about is like, okay, if you're in a role and like you're considering staying there, or if you're trying to figure out, salary ranges and stuff, like let's help you do that where you're at as much as we possibly can. But man, jobs are just falling from the sky right now. And Caleb, I'm sure you're you're getting a lot of churches trying to get some help with recruiting great production people.
Yeah, I think just like you said, like every church is hiring right now. Every single church is looking for somebody. And I think like maybe in the last 6 months, like it's taken a little bit of a turn, and I've seen some churches like maybe not like massive churches, but that 2,000 to 1,200 to 2,000 person church that like needs a TD. They've been operating maybe at like a volunteer capacity, high level volunteer. Some of those like some of what I'm seeing is like because of some inflation things, because of like churches being a little bit more nervous about like who are we hiring that's external from the outside, and what are we gonna have to pay them? Some churches aren't able to do it, and so that's been a very interesting turn to like see a little bit of shift in like this frantic need of like, hey, it's COVID, like we have to have somebody, we'll do whatever we can. Now it's like, okay, we're functioning, we know what we need week to week to like function. And so what's the right person, and who's that person's gonna, who's the right person that's gonna step on our staff? Because externally it can be challenging to hire from the outside, and there's pros and cons to doing that, the same as hiring internally as well.
So when you have churches reach out to you, and whether they're Slingshot or not, are they saying, yeah, we're looking for somebody with X amount of years of experience, like 5+ years experience? Or are they getting to the point where they're like, you know what, we'll take anybody?
Little bit of both. So I do a lot of like, we would call them discovery questions on a call with the church for the first time. Here's the reason why. Like the way that we approach staffing in that context for a church is very different than what most churches are used to. They're used to Billy growing up in 4th grade and all of a sudden making his way to the audio console, and then all of a sudden he's the TD.
Yay, Billy!
This isn't a joke. This is everyone, I swear.
Yep. Correct. And so that's the primary way that people have done it. And the win for us at Slingshot and the way that we're looking at it is knowing, hey, like we actually see value in many churches hiring the way that you guys always have. For the people that have grown up, culture is like probably the number one thing that like we're looking for. And so when you have somebody with a culture like skill set, on your let's say your volunteer team or whatever this is, it can be a great opportunity to hire those people into those roles. But most of the time when they call us, they're going, hey, we explored this season of hiring Billy, and we tried it out on a temp 3-month basis, 6-month basis, whatever it is. And we just don't feel like this is the right thing. With somebody who has more experience over this person, they would be amazing. So we're not going to let Billy go, but we just need like a leader to like really invest in them from a production side of things. So a lot of those, we're stepping into that, but like we see some very specific things that people want, like whether it's skill sets of, we need them to be like an incredible front of house person. We need them to have this experience in, let's just say we want to have somebody who has been in a multi-site church before, or we want to have somebody who's been in a church that's larger than ours. That's a very difficult thing to wrestle with if we're in a search of kind of figuring out what does that look like. And it's very different for every church. So it's hard to say like it's a one, size fits all kind of thing, as like every church has its unique culture, as all of us have experience both working in church and like meeting with churches. And so, it's very, very, very nuanced to like the specific church and the culture of like what they're needing, but it's anything and everything that you could imagine of what they're asking for.
Okay, a quick aside, and then Blake will get back to these years of experience. But taking this example, let's call him Billy. He's grown up in the church, and he started, running sound at 19 years old, and he's like kind of grown into the tech director role at his church. Let's say he's now, 26, he's young married, and he's being paid $44,000 a year because he grew up in the church and started when he was a teenager. Do you think churches are unknowingly, I'm not blaming churches, but like they're underpaying guys that have just been there just because they didn't have to go search for somebody outside and pay market value?
Yes. Yeah. I think I see it a lot, and it's not just in production. Like I think that happens in many, many areas of ministry. I think that it happens with churches all over, of churches that have incredible culture. And I think it's something that really easily can get like pushed aside or like kind of forgotten about, because there's an excitement from the person being hired, because they're like, this is my church. Like I grew up here. Like this is so exciting for me to like want to be here and work in this environment, that like even those people and the people being hired are like, this is great. Like I have no problems with it. And the church is like, fantastic. You said yes to a salary that was way less than what we would have had paid if we would have had to do it from the outside. And so I don't think that people are doing it. I'm trying to like paint churches in a really, really strong, like good light for this, because I don't think they're trying to do it on purpose. I just think it's happened naturally. And then over time, people have gotten used to, hey, well, we were paying X production person, Billy, $40,000 a year. And now he left 5, 6, 7 years later to go to his next thing. And they hire from the outside, and this new guy's like, I won't come for less than 65 or whatever this looks like, obviously depending on like area. So it's like very, very like shocking to a church when they go, oh my gosh, like, is it this person that's asking for way too much money? Or is it like us that have been severely used to like underpaying in some of these specific roles?
And I think it's really important for churches to realize that I'm not saying that, this scenario person, Billy, we're calling him, is the ideal candidate, but the fact that he's grown up there, that he loves the ministry, that he's been there forever, typically in my mind, he's so much a better fit for 65 grand than having to go do a candidate search, bring in some person from the outside for 65 grand. And it's also on that person to know what you're worth and to have those hard conversations. And like we did, I don't know where this episode falls, but we did another one with Matt Wright, and just talking about how to have these conversations with your supervisor, your executive pastor, to approach the salary conversation. So if you're in a church and you've been there forever and you're grossly underpaid, it's time for that conversation.
Yeah, I want to give churches, two big caveats here, because we're here to help everybody. We're not here to give the church tech a gun and tell them to run, fight for salaries. What Toby just said, you got to advocate for yourself. Number one, you can't assume your boss knows what you want. That's why I tell Toby what I want every single day.
And don't assume your boss knows what you're worth. Like an executive pastor might not know that he's going to have to pay 65 plus for somebody outside when you're making 44.
Yeah. And then secondly, to your point that you guys just got done saying, I think every place, me and my wife have talked about this. It's so bizarre. You have to change jobs to get valued for what you're currently worth, because people just get used to it. It's like the frog in the boiling water. The people that are around you don't see your skill set. So that's not just a church problem, but I wanted to dive even deeper into these analytics since we got this juicy survey. If you have filled it out, thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. You made this series happen. If you haven't, it's still available in our Instagram bio. You're going to give valuable resources to techs around the country if you fill it out. We're going to publish it at the end of the series. So is there a magical year that you see as a recruiter that is like getting a bigger bump in pay? Because we've seen 21% of our TD respondents had been a tech for 3 to 5 years. Same amount, 21% for 6 to 8. 23% were at 15 plus years, and that blew me away because I figured there'd be too much burnout for people to make it that long. So when are you seeing the bump of pay happening?
And Blake, to clarify, you're talking about how long they've been a tech at their church.
Now, that's another weakness of the survey. I don't know if it was specific enough. Like, honestly, though, I don't care. If it's 3 churches, that's still like years of a tech like experience. So are you seeing a magical year when it's like churches are willing to pay more at 5 years? I know in marketing, 5 years is oftentimes a lot big. It's that kind of metric.
Yeah. I think that people throw out the 5-year like thing on resume or on like job postings all the time. Like it doesn't matter whether you're like a fry cook somewhere, they're like 5 years of experience. You know what I mean? Like everybody just wants 5 years. I don't know who picked 5, but it is what it is. Here's the reality. And Toby said it, I think just a second ago, like people are getting their bumps in pay by changing jobs is the reality of it. So I have like so many thoughts about that. Specifically, like I'll speak about myself and the way that worked for me. So like this first job that I ever took going into this first church in St. Louis that I was at, I I remember having the salary conversation in the first phone call with the church, which, by the way, I really love. I think like that's the way that we approach it when we talk with candidates from a Slingshot perspective. We have those conversations in the first conversation, whether it's both, we do it both through like a questionnaire that comes in before we chat, and then also like while we're chatting, like during an interview, because everybody's different. Their life stage is different, whether you have 10 kids or you just got married or you're single. It doesn't really matter what you're wanting to make. It's just like, hey, this is what I'm hoping for. And then we kind of put you in these brackets of knowing, hey, we're probably not going to present you a church that's paying less than that because it probably wouldn't be a good, fit for you. And so for me, I had this first conversation about salary going into the church, and I'll never forget. Like I remember sitting in my room, and he goes, "Well, what are you wanting to make?" And I had zero concept of how much money that I should make.
I hope you didn't say zero.
Oh, no. I didn't say zero. I said even worse, which is probably like in the 30s. Okay. This is like, I had zero concept, guys. Okay. For what it is. And when I started, I'm pretty sure that I started at like 35,000 in a full-time role, in a church. My first gig, I was ecstatic because my wife and I had just gotten married. And to be honest, at the time, we bought a house. Like I bought a house off of that salary. Like I couldn't believe it. It was dirt cheap, at the time in St. Louis when we were living out there. And so it was amazing, but I didn't realize it until 6-7 months in that I was going, wait a minute. I started like getting on these like old school church tech forums that was run by like Todd Elliott and Bill Swearingen at the time. Dennis Choi was a part of those, and all these forums that was on this website of like, all of a sudden people are talking about salaries, and I'm like, whoa, I severely underestimated what I'm supposed to make here. Oopsie daisy. And I actually think, now that I'm thinking about it, as I was going through the interview process, I realized when we were talking about salary range that I was definitely less. And I think at a 90-day, they bumped it to 38,000. So 38, okay. So I was, extra 3,000. Yay. It was fun. But when we talk about like when are changes happening for people, rarely, and this is not just this is not just in production, but this is in all seats of ministry. And I also believe in like jobs in general. People make the largest pay bumps when they change jobs. And they're either going to change jobs because they want to go to this place, or the only other way that they could see that large type of jump, let's say from 50,000 to 65,000 in a role, was because somebody offered you a different role and you brought it back to the church and said, hey, I'm planning on taking this job. And then they go, don't go, I will just pay you that. That happens. And sometimes churches are willing to match it. Sometimes they're not. I have a long story that I should talk about at some point about my experience doing that.
I was just about to say that might be a bunny trail, but that's a great tactic and it's fair, but it's a difficult thing to do nicely.
Yeah.
So maybe we should dive into that.
Yeah. Okay. So I went from that church in St. Louis to the chapel. And I remember this, this was us moving back into Illinois. And I remember getting my first paycheck and I was like, oh my gosh, this is not nearly as much as what I thought it was going to be. Me doing calculations on all these salary take home pay calculators. It's so hard because they go, here's how much you make a year. And I go, all I care about is how much I make every 2 weeks. It's a thing in general. Oh my gosh. Yeah. So I'm like, so I jump into the chapel. I was there for maybe 2.5 years, 3 years, living at a very, I think in the time that I had started and the time that, that this next scenario happens, I had made maybe an extra $2,000. And that was, I think, through just normal cost of living, 5%, 4%, increases, whatever we were doing at the time. And I remember getting an offer, actually from the company that I work for today at Amplio. And I was going to take it. We were pregnant with our second kid If you have a spouse and you're listening to this, there's something that happens like when you have kids or when you're pregnant. Maybe for me as a dad, I know that my wife experienced this as a mom when she was being pregnant, but like something happens in your brain that you go, am I doing enough for the family that is about to get bigger in my own home? And I start exploring, I need to make more money because I'm feeling nervous. Maybe that's me being an Enneagram 6, like super anxious person in general. Maybe it's because I do feel like I deserve more money. Whatever the case was, I started exploring different, opportunities. And I felt like I was going to jump in. My wife and I prayed about it. We felt like, hey, we need to do this for the financial aspects, but we're only jumping ship at the church for the financial implications of it. And I wasn't going in to try to, negotiate or like wiggle my way into them, giving me more money or like this, like, here's this offer letter, slam it on the table, match it, or I walk away. Like that was the opposite of what I was trying to do. So I remember like calling the executive pastor who was my boss at the time. And I was like, hey, can we meet? I was like so nervous. I circled up in his office with him. I'm like, here's the deal. I got an offer. It's a great offer. It makes another, 15,000 more than what I make now. It feels like a great jump for me. And I had not seen that number before on an offer letter ever in my life. And I was like, this is great. Like I have to do this. I would be a bad husband and dad if I didn't, is the, my thinking at the time. And they're like, well, are you going for any other reason other than financially? And I was like, no, I love my job at the church, but I have to go because of, whatever. And they're like, well, let's just take that off the equation. Would you stay if the numbers were the same? I was like, 100%. Like, why would I leave? I have no reason to leave. And so the church was like, hey, we'll match it. We'll match the salary, whatever it is. And I met with the senior pastor because he wanted to talk to me about it too. And I told them the number, they were offering, and they were like, okay, sure. Like, we'll match it. And then I was walking out the door, and I think both of the executive pastors were like, you should have asked for more. And I was like, oh my gosh.
What?
And I walk out the door. It was a little bit of like a side comment, but I was like, crap, should I anyways, fast forward a couple of years. This is not something that I recommend everybody do. It has the possibility to really, like when you bring another offer to the table at your current employer, it has the possibility of having a really, really bad look, like that you're just trying to negotiate and squirm your way into more money. And I knew that after I had done that at that church that I didn't have that card anymore. So regardless of any more offers that had to come in the future, like I didn't have that, like I couldn't play it anymore. It would be a really, really, really bad look for me. And a couple of years later, a different organization had hit me up and wanted to reach out to me and hire me, got all the way to the end of the process. We were really like not sure if we wanted to go there. And it was.
Is he talking about when we tried to hire him at church gear, Toby?
Did you do that on your own, Blake?
And yeah, now you threw me all off. Where was I? Okay, so I got another offer from another role. I knew that I already played the card with the church, and I was like, okay, what should I do? And I ended up, through some other conversations, this is me now into my career a decent amount of time, realizing like what a good salary should be. I was making a fine salary for what I was doing at the role in my church, no question. But I was like, hey, I really want a housing allowance. And if you don't know what a housing allowance is, it's basically like pastoral minister status to Uncle Sam that says you're going to use, a portion of your money because you're doing pastoral responsibilities and you're deemed as a pastor to not have taxes taken out for whatever you're allocating towards your housing. It's a very complicated thing. Go call your accountant to have them explain it to you. But
or just listen to our Exec Pastor episode because Matt crushed it. Not a tech professional, but crushed it.
Amazing. Because it's like I've had to explain it so many times, and it's very hard to explain. And the benefits that the church has matter a lot into the benefit of the housing allowance, meaning you're essentially a contractor, but you're not a contractor. You still get a W-2 at the end of the year, but the government views you as you didn't pay your Social Security, so you have to either pay it, all of it, or sometimes a church will do a Social Security offset and pay that 7.5% for you. You pay the other 7.5%, just like normal taxes. Anyways, the benefit for it, if it works for you, can be a tremendous difference in your take-home pay, even though your salary on a yearly basis doesn't change. So I took this other offer, and I reached out to the senior pastor and I said, hey, I'm not going to ask you for more money. Here's what I'm asking you for, because this offer is very, very good and way more than you guys would ever be able to pay. I want a housing allowance, and here's the reasons why. I'm already doing these things. Let's make these things official from a pastoral side, and let's call it a day. And so that's what we did. And I remember getting my first check afterwards, and I literally said to my wife, I was like, this is how some of the worship pastors on our staff can afford the houses that they can afford. I'm hesitant to say that on a podcast, but I said that to my wife, and I was just like, oh my gosh, I had no idea what a benefit that was over the salary, because at the end of the day, man, like all I care about was how much is my mortgage? How much am I taking home every month? Can I pay my bills? Can I pay my car, my gas, and my groceries? All this stuff. Like that's the lens that I'm looking through. And it takes a lot more work tax season, like significantly more work tax season. Like my countertop is filled with receipts over the course of a year, and I'm doing all this stuff for a couple of weeks on end. It's terrible, but the win for it was enormous. So fast forward away from that. Okay, I'm getting ready to leave the chapel to go to Christ Community, and I was in a really like bad spot. It was November of 2020. I had been really, really burned in my role, and 3 years later today, I can think of the things that there's a lot of things that I would do differently based on the way that I left, and looking back now in time, I go, dang, like I think there was a lot more of me that was wrong maybe than them. I do
think when you set that pastor's car on fire, that was a bit over the line. Like that was a bit far.
Yeah, I thought it was gonna be fine, but turned out it got out of control in the parking lot. I didn't do that, by the way.
This is how rumors get started.
Yeah, this is how rumors get started. And so me and a couple people from the leadership team were talking about my exit and the reasons why, and I just had a lot of things that I wanted to share. That's code word for I have a lot of things that I'm mad about, and I want to talk to you about them before I leave. And I remember, reaching over or talking to the, one of the senior leaders on staff, and I just said, hey, like, do you feel like when I came to you the first time and said, hey, I have this offer, we're going from financial purpose, and then you were like, hey, I want to, match that offer, do you feel like I was like holding a gun to your head? And the answer was basically yes. And the church felt like in both of those scenarios that I had a gun to their head and they had no other option but to pay me. And that was the opposite of what I was trying to do in every way. And so I look back and I go, hey, I probably could have done some things differently. And so I share that to say, like, for people listening or are in that scenario that you want to you want to make more money. Everybody does. Like that's just a thing. There's a right way to do it and there's a wrong way to do it. And I thought I was doing it the right way. And it came across as not. And so it was a learning moment for me. It was very humbling, and like to hear somebody say that to me, that was not my, perspective walking into that scenario, but it is what it is. And so, I learned from it and I do things differently now, but it was very, very different, for me to hear that. And so that's my story about the, bringing another offer to the table and going, hey, what can we do about this? Because that's a way that, it was time to make a change.
Okay, Blake, I want to go off script a little bit, and you can slap me if it doesn't go well, and we can just revert back. But I'm seeing all these things that we didn't quite have in the notes, but I think they're super helpful stuff. So Caleb, let's start with if you are looking for a job and doing salary negotiations, probably the best place to start is negotiating your salary before you even get to the table? Would you recommend, like, who would you reach out to personally to ask, like, hey, I'm going to talk to this church, I'm going to apply for jobs, like, what should I be making? Are there like mentors or people that you go to in your life?
Anybody can call me. I'd be more than happy to give you the 5-minute spiel of what I think you should or shouldn't, just based off of, hey, tell me where you worked. What's your experience? Tell me your, experience in leading teams and leading paid staff is probably the two biggest. I would say leading paid staff is probably the bigger like negotiation bump that allows people to get paid more, because I've overseen full-time staff or part-time staff. I don't know of honestly a great place that like is a resource of going, here's what you should make. There's that, the Facebook group that everybody knows and jokes about, right, with billions and billions of people in it. And I found a post the other day of some church that was going, hey, we want to hire this person. It's a full-time role. It makes $16, $17 an hour. And the comments just lit up, in this post. It was absolutely ridiculous. And so there's not a lot of great online resources for like people to go to for going, hey, like, what is my value? What is my worth? What is right, coming out of college versus I've been around for a couple years, or let's just say I'm 25 and I'm married. That's also a different, part of the conversation of just like, how much is, the right salary for me, and demographic and like geography is a massive, massive deal of, the kind of money that plays into it.
So, if you want to reach out to Caleb, we'll put his contact info out there if you're cool with that, Caleb. As far as Church Tech community, we at Church Gear are going to start offering some of these resources to be available to any Church Tech. But please reach out to wise counsel, and I stress the wise word, before you go into negotiations. Reach out to an executive pastor or a production director at a nearby large church or another church that you respect. Those guys would be happy to help you get those numbers kind of in your mind. And so let's start setting some realistic expectations. So you guys correct me if I'm wrong, but there's rarely an occasion where a full-time tech should make anything less than $35,000 to $40,000, because you can make that at Panda Express. You can go to Home Depot these days and make $40,000 just being an associate. That's not a skilled position. We're hiring for skilled position, even entry-level guys, let's say coming right out of college. Like, these are skilled positions. So, Caleb, would you say there's no reason any full-time tech at a church should make less than 35, 40?
Yeah, I mean, I would say like 45, and even today, to be honest, tickling the 50 number. I mean, when we jump in at Slingshot to start a search, before we start one, we make sure that the salary expectations of what they're asking and what the role is, that their expectations of what they're getting are in alignment. That can vary depending on geography. It can vary depending on the church size, all of these things. But in our heads, as we're kind of scoping out, hey, like, what is the type of person for this job? Like, we have to go, hey, like, is this the right salary? And for us, like, obviously depending on it, but if I'm thinking about a number like in that 50s range, mid 50s is like kind of where we look at it and go, hey, is this viable? And our lens is like, would somebody move their family across the country to come to this church for this salary? Now, not just coming to your church because God called you there or because you feel like, whatever, it doesn't really matter the reason. Would they come for that? And would they be able to comfortably live on their own on that salary? And that's where, for me personally, I've had a lot of like struggles with people, let's say, who have been on my teams in the past, those same kind of bullies who grew up in the church, that I was like, hey, these guys on my team are getting paid way too little. And I'm the guy who's doing it outside for Slingshot and like knows the numbers, knows all this stuff. And even in those scenarios, like, I wasn't able to convince leadership for my own team to pay them what I believe that they need. And to the point where we knew that if any of them left, we would have to pay that position more. And we did when we rehired them. It was very, very, very like challenging. And that's the part of like through all of this, I think it's super duper important to say, like, and I was like thinking about it before we were getting on this call, that like, just because you have the skill set doesn't necessarily also mean that you're worth what you're asking for. Like, that's a very real, like, I'm going to totally play devil's advocate and go, you might have a really crappy attitude. You actually might not be as good as you think. You might be really sour to volunteers or say like backhanded comments to things that's just like, ooh, this is not good. And so you making that 40K is that you're the warm body in your seat. And for you to move up, you have to actually feel like, or the church has to feel like you are, number one, worth what you're asking for, regardless of where that is in the spectrum of like national averages, and go, am I serving this church really well? And am I serving it in a way that like the culture of like what we're going for at the church is benefited by me being here? So that's my, I got to say that, because I think some people think, oh my gosh, I got to be making all this more money. And I just go, I don't think you should, man. Like, you know, let's grow a little bit in the leadership and like develop some tools that you can have to like actually pastor your teams or pastor your staff or whatever this looks like. And then I'm all for people making as much money as they possibly can, you know?
Yeah. To comment on like, where should the salary start? I think it was when you combine 30,000 to 60,000, 70% of people were making 60K or less out of 378 people. Caleb, I want to go real quick back to the bringing the counter offer, because I just think that's the stickiest scenario maybe of the whole series, because it got you a $15,000 raise. It feels fair if people are buying things that they should buy them for a fair market rate. How did the church give you any advice on how you could have brought that to them kinder?
No, not in that scenario. It was a little, I think it was the wrong time to ask some of those things. I think it's a way that like, if the church really does want you, I believe that they will pay. Like, I think if any one of my guys ever came to me, and I actually never had to deal with this, like with anybody who was coming to me as their boss of saying, hey, I have another offer. But if they did, like, I was ready to run to accounting or to finance and go, hey, we have to pay this person this extra, whatever the number is, because I know that if this person quits today, I will have to, number one, retrain a new person in this role that will take 8 to 12 months. And I will be paying more than what they're asking for, you know, to bump, you know, in pay. And some churches will do it and some others, you know, some won't. And it's no different than like your budget in your house and your income level might be different than mine or Toby's or Billy's. Like, they're all different. And so in the same way, like, the church has different budgets. And just because you're a large church or multi-site church, like, it doesn't mean that you have the budget of another multi-site church that is in Texas or in who knows where, you know what I mean? Like, I've worked at some scrappy churches before when it comes to like operational budgets. So
Toby, let's play this out live. See how comfortable you feel with this. I bring you a offer letter that is 15K more. I mean, that's a big number. I'm not talking about like what you do if you accept it or not. Just like as the boss, and that would be like as executive pastor. Like, is there a thing you would advise on just like the nicest way to start that conversation?
I mean, it's a very tricky thing. What Caleb said, that like it's a card you can play once, is very much true. And it's regardless of what, when you play it, it's gonna leave a sour taste it'd leave a sour taste in my mouth. It'd leave a sour taste in your pastor's mouth. So you got to play it extremely carefully. Is there another way of saying, hey, I want to have an honest conversation with you. I love being here. I love this church. I know there are opportunities out there for me to make more money. I don't want to take them because I love being here, but also I want to make sure I'm being a responsible steward for my family. And we can pull up the Bible verse that says, you take care of your family. So you approach it that way and say, what do you need from me to get to this level? Can we set sort of a leadership plan, a growth plan for me to prove to you that I'm worth this? And what in your mind, Pastor, is worth this amount? Because the last thing I want is to leave and then you have to go search for somebody else that doesn't share the same mission, and then you got to pay him this anyways. Like, if you can kind of approach it in that way where it's a conversation and really you're getting on the same vision and mission, then that makes a huge difference rather than, hey, here's another offer letter, match it or I'm out.
I'd almost say that, like, you start with that conversation, you never mention the other offer, and if that conversation Toby just outlined goes badly, I'm not saying this is a default answer, but Caleb, do you think that almost kind of tells you, like, well, if you do get another offer, you probably should go? Like, do everything Toby just said in a real, honest, kind way, and if you can't make it work at your current one, the next offer might just kind of be that's the one you take rather than souring your current place to get a raise.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is you have to be okay. As soon as you get that offer and you're ready to tell somebody about it, you have to be willing to walk away basically that day, because the second that you bring that to the table, they're questioning intentions, they're questioning motives of why you're wanting to do this, and it has to be set up with some serious level of like care and understanding of like, here's the reasons why. I don't even know. I don't actually love the bring it after the conversation, because it feels like it's like I just groomed you to get to the point of like me providing an offer that I want you to match. I think it's also important, like, so we have this policy at Slingshot because we work with so many different churches. It's important that, like, for the churches or other organizations that we serve or have served in the last 3 years, basically, we have a sunset period where the candidates, and this is anybody that is on this church staff. So let's just say Crossroads Church, okay? Because every church is named Crossroads. Crossroads Church.
I can think of 3 right now.
Yeah, Crossroads Church does a search for a worship pastor, okay? For the next 3 years, every single one of those staff members, regardless of where they're at in what department, if they're full-time or whatever, if they come to Slingshot and say, hey, we want to become a candidate because I want to apply for this job, we have to say we actually have to have written supervisor approval to understand that. And here's why: because we don't want to look like we are taking people out of the churches that we are serving, because it's a real bad look, and we don't want to do that. We're not in the business of just trying to poach people or take people out of those roles. We know that there are seasons of that, and we also know that, like, because of that policy for us, that causes some severe like worry and scaredness in people to go, I can't tell my church that I'm looking because I feel like I'll get fired, or I feel like the culture will be wrong, or they'll view me, poorly, and all this stuff, which is, like, honestly very real in some scenarios. And it really, really stinks for people that are in that seat. But knowing that, regardless of if you were working with Slingshot or another organization that had a similar policy, like, it's important that you have an open and honest relationship about the way that you're feeling in your job that would cause you to even want to look to get to wherever that next thing is, whether that's frustrations, whether that's culture, whether it's pay, whether it's any more people on my team or whatever that is. Like, build an open and honest relationship with your supervisor, because those conversations are much easier to have down the road if you go, hey, I actually do have an offer, and you're having that conversation. And if that's for the first time, it's going to be a blindside, and it probably isn't going to go well in the first place, to be honest, because they're going to go, I don't know how to help you here, man. Like, you didn't talk about all these things that were frustrating you, and now you have a job offer and you're telling them all to me at once, and I'm supposed to make a decision right here. So again, playing devil's advocate, but it's a very, very tricky scenario of that side of looking for a job and negotiating what that is.
Thanks for hanging out with us. We hope to see you back next week for more absurd stories, tech takeaways, and overall buffoonery here at the Church Gear Studios.
So, Blake, are we saying that Caleb is twice as good as any other guest that we've ever had?
I can't do that, man. Todd Elliott is in the Rolodex, but I can say that he's twice as compelling and pretty, so we wanted to keep him on the line.
I think he's twice as good as his previous self because he's already been on the podcast himself. It's very meta, but he's doubled his value as far as Church Gear podcasting go.
So I think what that means is two things. One, Caleb needs his whatever they're paying him at Amplio. You need to double it. Like, come on, guys.
Yep.
We're gonna take him. I'll tell you that.
However many kids he has, he should just double that.
Yep, double his wives. Wait a minute. And then secondly, we want to get these salaries up. If the people that are in the majority, 30 to 40, We're almost trying to double that to get to 60. So share this episode, post it in some of the Facebook groups. I don't know how we get this to people's execs, Pastor, because the church tech can't text it to them. That's the most passive aggressive thing ever, but somehow we got to get it to them. So just share it like wildfire and hopefully it lands in their ears.
And I think the best thing for the community is for me to match the average salary of church techs to you, Blake, so that you become the face of the church tech community.
Yep, let's do it. Locked it in.